Ladies and gentlemen, Elaine May.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Carrie, for joining us. Let me just apologize ahead of time because, one, we get very Pollyanna-ish about Elaine May. So, like, this is probably just going to be more of a conversation and us kind of geeking out about Elaine May more than it is an actual interview about the book. So I apologize if I maybe set it up a little bit differently. But I wanted to start out with one, congratulations on the book. You're coming up on its year milestone. In our eyes, it's still amazing that Elaine doesn't quite get the recognition for being the trailblazer for improv comedy, to script writing, to being a standalone, standing against her contemporaries like Cassavetes and Woody Allen, and even to the point where we don't really talk about her much as a trailblazer for women directors in the U.S. or in film at all. I was wondering, is that, from your perspective, does it still surprise you that, I guess, about considering all that she did, how she's still kind of to your book, a hidden genius?
Well, I mean, first of all, thank you for having me and thank you for your kind words about the book. I think it does surprise me, but it also doesn't. I think just looking at what has always been held up as the canon of art, it is 99% of the time men. And I think we had a very brief blip around the Me Too movement where people were re-examining the canons of art and music and film and literature and saying there are all these great women who have made enormous contributions or who could have made even bigger contributions but weren't really given their due or their chance, the same way that these guys that we hold up as the greats were. But I think that's kind of faded, so it doesn't always surprise me when people still haven't heard of Elaine May or still people haven't really fully acknowledged her on par with some of her contemporaries. And then the other thing too is, she doesn't have a volume of work that is as recognizable or as large as her contemporary. So it makes sense to me.
Yeah, I always vacillate between being amazed of how much she was able to accomplish, being the type of person that she was, and then also but being so stifled because of the talent that she had. That's more, my confusion around the whole situation. It's like, do you think that was there ever any point when you were doing your research about Elaine that where maybe she had a recognition of, I could do more or I could accomplish more if I played ball a little more along the lines of the studio system or our male-driven Hollywood system?
It's funny because I personally would come across that feeling and I personally would find myself getting a little frustrated and feeling a little bit like, you got to make a compromise at some point. You just you can't have it your way all the time. But I never totally saw that self-awareness from her. And I can't say that she never had it, but she never had it publicly, at least.
Something to kind of, I think, and continue on with that thread of thought. Claire Dederer has a blurb on the back of your book, and her book Monsters, which is fantastic, really, examines how we enjoy, or how are we to enjoy, great art by terrible people. And I'm in no way suggesting that Elaine May falls into this category, but how do you, in a work like this, maintain a level of forthrightness and honesty without slipping into kind of fandom?
That's an interesting question. I almost think, and I find myself doing this across all of my work, that when I am a fan of something that I am writing about, I feel like I have to be even more rigorous with myself and even more cautious in how I write and making sure that the fandom doesn't slip through, that something can be affectionate and something can come from a place of appreciation, but it doesn't have to be fawning. And I also think that we've just so bastardized what fan means these days, especially in terms of standum and everything. People have this idea that to be a fan of something means that you just give everybody, like give whoever you're a fan of a free pass, and it's just 100% adulation. But I feel like being a fan of somebody almost makes you more aware of their faults and more hyper vigilant of the things that they could have done differently, because you know them so well, almost you know their work so well that you know what their weak spots are, and you are able to affectionately and with love give like constructive criticism or call them out when something is wrong. That I don't think being a fan of somebody means deifying them. And even if it is Elaine May, I really did want to find myself in a place where I wasn't criticizing openly, but I also wasn't saying, I wasn't completely ignoring her blind spots or her faults.
Yeah, there is something that I really appreciate about the book is the level of admiration that you have for Elaine May, but also how you will hold her accountable, right? Or you won't let her off the hook. And along with that question, I mean, this book is a piece of biography, but it's also a piece of journalism. And as we've seen with the new journalists and then those that followed their lead, truth and fact don't always mean the same thing. And so much of Elaine's story is just that. It's a story, right? And so what so many perceive as the truth, and I'm curious how you kind of thought about balancing fact and the made up or perceived truth in this work.
I think a lot of it, writing, if I came up against something that I was like, this is obviously false or this is obviously embellished, but there are certain parts of the story where I felt, especially things like the 5 different ways it could have gone, the 5 different sides of the story when Mike and Elaine left the compass. I was like, you know what? That is something we are never going to know the facts about, because each person has their own truth and has their own version of how things happened that they have committed to memory. And it might be false, it might be true, it might have elements of both, but we'll never know. And I kept thinking about the, like print the legend, when I was writing it, that sometimes the legend says more than the fact or tells you more about somebody. Um, but I don't know. I think it was also interesting to me to kind of look at it and say, just getting like really meta about truth and just thinking like we're never going to know the whole truth. Isn't that kind of interesting? And doesn't that sort of echo real life where facts are objective, but truth is, when you think about it, kind of subjective. Everybody has their own slight slant on what truth is.
Yeah, we have our own versions of reality. And I think one moment where it comes through in the book is in the Dune story from Ishtar, and how we have, several different accounts of the sand and what happened to the sand. But again, the truth of that, it says so much more. The legend, right, says so much more about that production and about Elaine May as a director in person.
Right, exactly. We don't know. The sand could have been removed. The sand could have stayed there. But what matters actually is that somebody thought enough to share that story as a damning anecdote of the film. And why would they do that? And looking at that rather than asking, was it real or not? Like looking at the facts of the situation was less interesting to me than looking at why would somebody say that?
Was there any indication that her, outside of just being somewhat reclusive and private, that a lot of this building the myth was calculated? Or do you think it just kind of grew over time, and it was a thing that was born out of her not wanting to tell someone the true answer, and then it just kind of grew as her career expanded?
I think it was a little bit of both. I think, talking to some of her friends or colleagues, they would bring up the fact that she enjoys telling different versions of the truth. She enjoys telling them different stories, and she does it with them, her friends, and not just the press. So I think it is a little bit of both. I think she just kind of likes pulling everyone's legs.
Well, it plays into that improv, right? I mean, this idea that her, what I think is really beautiful, kind of pulling it back a little bit, is that her, and maybe a little frustrating for as a fan, but like her whole life was seemingly improv, right? It was just like every moment was a moment on stage and a moment to craft something beautiful. And I really like that idea of her not really caring, because what from scene to scene, from take to take, we'll just let the cameras roll and see what happens. Right? Sorry, Brock. That if you had it was
No,
just me
I
pontificating.
agree.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I was just gonna add that I that's something that makes me appreciate her even more, is that she's so slippery, right, and so tough to really get a handle on. Like, not that I even want to know the real Elaine May, right? I like this kind of crafted, you know, legend that she is, and I think that, yeah, she just becomes even more appealing, because we can't pin her down, and she refuses to be pinned down. Right. I want to make sure that I give her all the agency that she that she has in the world. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And I think it's especially appealing today because we live in such an oversaturated world where we just know so much about everyone, celebrity or not. We know so many details about people's personal lives. And you kind of sometimes find yourself, at least I do, saying, like, I don't think my brain was meant to withhold, like, or it was meant to hold all of this information about people I know and I don't know. And again, the legend is just more interesting. I don't know. I feel like personally, I don't think I ever really want to meet Elaine because, like anybody that you've sort of built up in your mind, or anybody who exists as like a figure or an idea of a person, meeting the real thing and getting to know the real thing is only inevitably going to be some sort of letdown because you have the legend in your mind.
Yeah. We don't want to see behind the curtain. Not really. Right. None of us
Right.
do. None of us do. Yeah.
So let's get to the real question then. What's your favorite Elaine May movie?
Oh, it changes all the time. It really does. I can't I I really don't know if I can pick. I feel like, and most of the time I would say my favorite is The Heartbreak Kid, but the one I watch most often is Ishtar. I There's something about Ishtar that is just, it's probably because it's like her easiest to slip into. It's the most accessible one. It's just, if I need an easy laugh or something to put on in the background, that's kind of the one I'll go to.
That, I mean, for an honest answer, that, telling the truth is dangerous business. So it's, so I wanted to, especially since you said that like your favorite was Heartbreak Kid. So we're doing a screening of The Heartbreak Kid in just a few days. I wonder if you could give some more insight into the Jewish controversy and the sort of second wave feminism controversy around that film.
Sure. Trying to like remember because it's been a while since I wrote that chapter. Uh, I think the biggest controversy, the Jewish controversy and the second wave feminism controversy kind of went hand in hand, and it was all about how Lila, who's played by Jeannie Berlin, is portrayed, and people were very upset on across the board, thinking that she was not only a Jewish stereotype, but that she was a stereotype of a nagging woman or of like a needy, childish woman. And I think part of that was, it's tough because part of that is the character as written on the page. And I think that watching it, Jeannie Berlin gives that character so many layers of depth and nuance and lines that could have read like a punchline or could have come off as truly like dated sitcom-y, like Jewish stereotype. Nagging Yenta could have she could have easily delivered the lines like that, but instead she has more depth or more hope or more nuanced sort of hurt to her delivery. And she had also said something in an interview at the time where she was like, I based this girl off of a girl I went to camp with, and she was like a Christian blonde-haired girl, by the way. Like, this is not an ethnic thing. Like, this is not a woman thing. This is just the character. And Elaine backed that up and was basically like, I'm making my movie how I'm making my movie. It is not intended to be offensive to anybody. And if you are, I think her whole thing too is across multiple sort of occasions when she would come up against a little bit of criticism was most of the time like, if you're offended, that's on you, or that's your problem, which is not like the best way to address that. I think it makes sense that people were offended, but I also think part of that is just it was such a reactionary time. Yeah, they're allowed, I think, like, they were women and the Jewish community, they were both right to be offended and like valid in their feelings, but at the same time maybe blew it out of proportion just a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly a fine line, I think, in that film, and I think that Elaine May knows that she's walking that fine line. And
Yeah.
I think she even said, like, look, I kind of go after everybody the same way. And not that that's always like, an excuse, but I think she was kind of like, look, I'm going after men and women the same way in this film, and Jew and Gentile in the same way in this film. And that's what I think is really kind of interesting about The Heartbreak Kid, is that we get this kind of controversy or feedback or kind of backlash, but nobody in that film comes off well.
Yeah, no. Not at all.
In your book, you talk about how Elaine never really concerned herself with whether or not she, and kind of furthering this question, whether or not she should be telling this story. But what I find so amazing about her, especially her writing, even when you go back to the improv pieces and how she handled Dell and how she handled Mike, it's really, really astonishing how she was able to uncover aspects of the male psyche, especially in the early 70s, that I don't even think males at that time were ready to acknowledge. Talking to male friendship, platonic friendship, it really, and to the idea of going back to Mathau, kind of being in a weirdly sexless existence as kind of I guess as this rich man who wanted nothing to do with women whatsoever. Was there anything when you kind of crossed I guess some of that could be construed as trying to get back at men, but was there any sort of or to put them in their place? Was there any sort of notion really of what her intent was of kind of focusing on male characters?
I think her intention was just that she was so fascinated by them, and I think it was nothing. I mean, I can't say that there was no malice in it at all, because I think, again, to your point, Brock, she went after everybody. But I don't think it was, and I'm going to skewer men because they're men and put them in their place. I think it was just a matter of she was almost always the only woman in the room. And so she was like writing about what she knew, which were all of these men that she observed. And I think especially when you're somebody who is a little bit on the outside of something and observing objectively, you can see those sort of pressure points or those quirks or characteristics that, the in-group probably doesn't fully see in themselves, because if everyone else is behaving the same way as you're not going to think there's anything unusual or interesting or funny about how you are behaving or how you could be perceived. But because she was so everything, her whole humor her whole outlook on humor was observational. And so I think it was really just noticing these guys and writing down what they were doing and putting that into a story.
So something, and again, I think kind of continuing on with this idea of Elaine May kind of being the only woman in the room and, being expected to act a certain way and then of course not acting that way. But something I find striking and sort of a bit unsettling is how she's always described, usually by men, as this kind of idiot savant like she can't tie her own shoes, but she's a multi-hyphenate genius, right? And so like this type of backhanded compliment always seems reserved for women. And so I guess I'm curious, like from your kind of position on more on the inside, how much progress have we really made in regards to like women getting to make the films that they want?
That's a good question. Yeah. I mean, I know, I don't know, especially going back to the thought about like describing her as an idiot savant. It's like I feel like I must have heard other men described in that way, but I can't off the top of my head think of like an example, a specific, oh, well, they used to say this all the time about this director or that director, and he was a genius. Like, I really, for the most part, can't. Maybe sometimes you read anecdotes about Coppola and you're a little bit, most of these people are like, he's a genius, but he was fucking insane. But like, that's not quite the same as he was a genius, but he was an idiot. But in terms of women being able to make the films they want, I think we're at a stage right now in Hollywood, at least within the studio system, which kind of to me mirrors where we were in the 60s when it is this dated behemoth that is struggling to keep up with youth culture and new technology. In the 60s, it was TV, and now it's social media and TikTok, and trying desperately to find ways to appeal to people, but that appeal is so corporatized and so like existing IP and, you know, remakes and superhero franchises that I don't think anyone is making the movie for the most part. If you're working in a studio system that is dying as it is right now, 99% of the time you're not making the movie you want to make. I think there's a lot more room in independent film, and I think independent film is starting to kind of make a comeback, but or with like the mini majors. But I think it's really hard because it's such an expensive medium for anybody, man or woman, to make the film that they want to make on their own terms. Unless they are financing it entirely themselves, it's just there may be like three people out there who are doing it.
So, to that end, do you think Elaine's supposed film that exists today, that they're looking for an insured director on, will ever see the light of day?
I always feel like the grouch when I answer this kind of question.
No, I think we're with you, but yeah.
No, it's not like it's not going to happen. I'm sure a finance thing, even if they could get the financing to make it, the whole thing that Sebastian Stan has said, where they're looking for an insurance director, there is no shortage of amazing,
Right.
wonderful, talented directors, big name directors who would love to shadow Elaine May and serve as her backup. I think the issue is probably her agreeing to one of those directors. I
That's a
think
good
it's
point.
like the reason why so many of her projects post Ishtar didn't get made is because it always came down to a compromise that she did not want to make.
Here's a quick question. Why do you think that a quick question? I'm sorry. Why do you think that Elaine May didn't go that Cassavetes route then, and sort of like financing her own work, kind of like he, following his lead in that fashion?
I always wondered that, especially because they were such good friends. I can't imagine him not trying to convince her to do that. But I wonder if it is because, and I know that like there were some anecdotes about this that Mike Nichols had where, especially like, I think it was, I don't know, 2005 or six or something, where they were in conversation and he sort of alluded to the fact that they were used to making movies in a comfortable manner. And not that I would call any of Elaine's productions comfortable, but it's possible that she was like, if it's this hard with somebody else putting up the money, I don't even want to try to do it on my own. And I know that there was the one film that she sort of like ghost scripted, that was entirely in the spirit, that was entirely independently produced. And basically all accounts of that where everybody involved had come from working with the studio or working with an independent producer who would get a backing company and then sell it to this, like, and everyone was like, this was miserable, like we're never going to do this again, it's just we're too old for this. I think that it was just maybe probably that.
It's always surprising, though, to us, I guess, because we did a deep dive a couple of years ago, in just kind of going through her entire filmography, going through her scripts and her acting roles, and especially in the '90s when the money was so. I mean, where you could get people, they were handing out $1 million on the street corners, apparently, when during the Sundance age, that no one turned to Elaine May, or even really, I guess Cassavetes at that point would have been too poor of health, but no one would have turned to Elaine May and said, "Here, you've got to have something in your back pocket. Go make this film for me."
Yeah, no, I think, but then again, I think like early 90s, Ishtar was still so much a punchline. I don't think people even really started to turn on Ishtar until like the DVD era, like early 2000s. And even then it was like, oh, this is a cult film now. I think she was really like deep in director jail for that, and deeply like not just in director jail, but there was such a stigma around her being crazy that even if they were handing out $1 million to everyone, they were like, I'm never going to see anything
Yeah.
from her if I give her $1 million.
Yeah.
Even the reclamation of Ishtar is not really a reclamation of Elaine May. It still feels like okay, Beatty and Hoffman weren't, this wasn't as bad as we thought it was, or it actually is a good movie and it's funny, but I don't really see any sort of like, Elaine, we did Elaine May wrong in this case, and it really was. She turned out something that, like, she took two huge stars, two huge difficult stars, and was able to put together something, that again, that they sabotaged from Jump, and or even before Jump, and like you said, was a continues to be a national punchline, because we just did a screening of A New Leaf. We mentioned Ishtar screening, and people all kind of giggled at that point, knowingly so, I guess.
I mean, I think I see it sometimes, but I think I'm thinking just of an interview I did with Natasha Lyonne, and she had said something like, it just stuck in my mind forever. She was like, Beatty and Hoffman got to make movies after that. It's criminal that we didn't let Elaine May make a movie after that. But you're right, it is a lot. The vast majority of the discourse is, it's not that bad, or this was funny actually, and not, yeah, this should have not been, this shouldn't have been her final film.
Yeah. And you said, I mean, one of the ways you describe that, I think, is really telling when you said that, Elaine May is crazy, or people call her crazy, which, again, I don't think that we call many male directors that, right? Again, this seems something sort of reserved for female directors that, is code for, oh, they have an independent spirit or a mind of their own. And so we think that that's toxic and crazy and don't want anything to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, it also might be a generational thing, because I do think we've started calling some directors crazy now, but it's still very few and far between, and it's almost like saying crazy like affectionately, like, wow, they're crazy because they're not doing things in the status quo, and that's insane. Good for them, I guess. But I don't, yeah, I don't know if I don't think it is as commonly applied to men as it is to women.
Do you have a favorite anecdote about one of her films? Something that that stands out to you?
Oh gosh. I I don't know. There are so many.
Right.
I do kind of, I mean, it goes back to like the crazy and like the idiot savant, but I do kind of love, there was a story about when she came out to LA to be on the set of The Birdcage, and she was like in the production room and just like talking to the crew, and she had floated that she was like gonna get her driver's license while she was out there in LA, and everyone was like, no, please don't. No, like, no, don't. Like, and the person who told me that, they're like, she's so smart and competent, but when you talk to her, you always kind of get the idea that her mind is in a million other places. Like, yes, it is focused on this conversation, but it is also here and here and here. And they were like, I don't want to think about what that would be like when you are behind the wheel of a 10,000 motor vehicle.
It's just a further mark of genius, and that she can hold so many things in her head at the same time.
Yeah. Look, I don't blame them. Driving's hard.
Yeah. Yeah. No one likes it. No one.
Go ahead, Brock. I didn't.
No. I was going to ask if you had anything else, Jason.
I mean, I could talk about Elaine May all day long, but
I know.
let me, I guess, future of Elaine May fans and where do we all go and how do we all find each other? Are there any hopes from your perspective in regards to you put out this book, you spent all this time living in this world of Elaine May? I guess do you see a time where, you know, and again, I know that rights are difficult, especially with Heartbreak Kid, but like where we see the 4 films of Elaine May in a Criterion box set, or there's some sort of real retrospective or real kind of reclamation of her in you know, in the immediate future or in the future at all?
I don't know. I mean, I would love to see a Criterion box set. I feel like that's something that is probably, I can't imagine that that isn't like on the dream list of releases from them. I think it is just like, we got to get the rights. And I think that probably is holding back a lot of full-fledged reclamations, whether it is a screening series, or a new release of something. I think it's tough to do when you only have 4 films and one of them is hard to show. But I'm hopeful.
Yeah, I'm still amazed when people are like, "Who's Elaine May? I've never heard of this director," and I'm like, "How could you have not?" Yeah, it still boggles my mind.
But not even as a director, just as a director, right? Because I mean, like we talk about these films, and of course we screen them because she directed them. But like, and obviously, I think the script writing speaks for itself, even though a lot of times she's not even credited. But she's such a versatile and wonderful actress. That it really is, and it's unfortunate that a lot of things that she acted in weren't quite up to her standards in regards to, you know, the comedy or the film quality. But really, when you see her in something like one, obviously in A New Leaf, but something like even like Small Time Crooks, she's so brilliant in those roles. And it really is one of those things of like, yeah, if you don't know her from here or you don't know her from here, you definitely should know her at some point. And at all of her contributions, you should know something of hers.
Yeah, no, for sure. Definitely. And I don't know, I think it's hopefully changing a little bit. I think like film Twitter and Letterboxd have definitely increased, like the young people at least who might otherwise not know her at all because everything was either out of print or hard to find. Like, you know, I don't think many millennials or like Gen Z for that matter would know who Nichols and May are, but my parents knew who Nichols and May were.
Mm-hmm. Maybe Gen Z will discover Elaine May via TikTok. That would be pretty amazing.
Okay, my last question for me. I know that you weren't able to meet Elaine. Was there anything else that kind of you felt like? I know an author and any sort of artist has to put together an end on their piece of work. Was there anything that you felt like, man, I wish I could have just gotten that last piece to put in the book?
I think I will forever be thinking about that. I think it's and any day could pass by and I could think of a new one that I wish I did, or a question I wish I had asked somebody. I think it's all authors have to end something. It is very difficult and very difficult to not think of all the like, oh, I should have, or I wish I had done that. So there's not one, but there's a bunch.
Yeah.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for the time. We really, truly appreciate it. It is an astounding piece of work, and it's
a great book.
and for us, like it's just like Oh man, when these types of things come out, because when we were doing our research, it was just the 4 films of Elaine May that was really out and about. So yeah, one, thank you and congratulations on. I know it's been a year, but congratulations on putting it together. And do you see a point? One last question, I guess. Do you see a point? Like, have you gotten tired about talking about Elaine? I guess in the past year, do you see this as being the thing that you're going to be doing for a good long while, and essentially every May that comes out for in the near future?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely has made me, I think I kind of, at a certain point while writing the book, I was like, oh, I'm going to be attached to this person for the rest of my life in a way. So I think I chose somebody that I would want to stick around with and talk about for a while. I think then it's just also been a very good teachable moment for, like, you know, the next project I do. I have to make sure I'm going to want to talk about them. It's been good so far.
Yeah, I was going to say the
Good, good, good.
conversation opportunities are endless with Elaine May, so that's at least good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you,
thank you.
Carrie. Yeah, best of luck going forward.
Thank you.
Hello? Hello, Arthur? This is your mother. Do you remember me?